All right, I don't usually do unboxing videos, but this particular time I regret not doing it because, well, it was a bit silly. What am I talking about? Well, kind of recreate it here really quick. Got this package today from Amazon, and you can certainly see how big it is. Significantly larger than the item that I thought I was going to receive. And when I opened it up, well, lots of empty space inside with no padding, so what was inside was rattling around. Now what was inside, a little bit more reasonable. Literally half the size of the external box, but open this one up, and what was inside was, yeah. Now, for those of you who recognize the distinctive black box, well, the spoiler's already in the title. Let's talk about what was inside because, yeah, the silliness kind of continued a little bit. So I want to backtrack sort of a little bit to talk about philosophy of use in terms of why I bought the thing. Now, in my study of HEMA, I have become fond of the basket hilt, whether you're talking about a backsword or, like they say, broadsword. Now, depending on the source and the situation scenario you're training, and just, well, how you're equipped, you could certainly use the weapon very effectively by itself. Either risking your left hand for a bit of assistance, and it's certainly better if you have a glove or a cloak or something to help protect it, or you can just keep it completely out of the way, right? Now, if you want the additional protection tool, your two primary choices, choice one, would be a shield. Now, I don't have a targe yet, but I do have this sort of large buckler, which I plan to review here shortly, and I've gotten to be quite fond of boss grip shields. But then I don't have a strap shield yet. Talk about that later. But yeah, this makes a very effective weapons combination. Absolutely. It's also quite a workout depending on how heavy your shield is. Now, the other major choice that's mentioned in many of the sources is a dagger. Now, I'm assuming if it's a Scottish source, we're talking about a Scottish dirk, which I don't happen to have yet. I haven't really found one that I'm fond enough of to buy, or confident enough to buy. If you have any recommendations, definitely put them in the comments. Always appreciate your input. So, yet. But I'm going to assume that they're not talking about, well, a more classical parrying dagger. Now, this cold steel one is certainly beefy enough to take a hit from a weapon like backsword, broadsword, saber. That's not a problem, but I don't really feel these match. Speaking of not matching, well, based on what's available to me, I've tried some other options. Yeah, this is kind of a stretch. But sizable, heavy, either wakizashi, otanto, something like that, kind of can do the job and fill the role, yes. But yeah, I don't know, just doesn't fit. Yes, I've tried these too. Interesting thing with something like this is the curve of the weapon makes an interesting tool that can kind of hook, catch, parry. So it's kind of interesting in the bind, but there's not a lot of hand protection. By the way, that's one of the other reasons why I've been reluctant to pick up a Scottish dirk. Not a lot of hand protection. Mike likes his hand protection. So, looking at what's available out there, I thought, what about this? Potential. All right, let's do the out-of-the-box sharpness tests, shall we? So, printer paper.
Okay. A little ragged. Not the sharpest thing. I don't know. Edge seems to be a bit inconsistent. Let's try that false edge, which is a bit of an edge on it, but not much. Okay. Is it shaving sharp? Yeah, a little bit. Let's try breaking down random Costco box. How about that? Huh. Well, that's pretty nice, actually. Yeah. Huh. Okay, so I mentioned the silliness with the packing didn't end with the ridiculously oversized boxes that it came nested in. Once I got into the actual cold steel box, I found what I expected to find. Based on previous purchases, yes, the blade and the scabbard were wrapped separately. Let's take a look at the scabbard really quick. I'm actually quite impressed with it. Now, there are a few dings and blemishes on it, and I think that may have come from not only the shipping, but how it might have been stored. I'll talk about that in just a second, but I'm impressed with this particular setup. It comes with a detachable frog, and it all looks pretty solid. It's all pretty thick leather. It's got a brass shape and kind of a brass reinforcement around the throat, and then you have this little frog button here. You unsnap that, and the sheath itself comes out of the frog if you want to wear it in a different way or display it separately or whatever you want to do. And the belt loop has what looks like a fairly sturdy swivel on it. Time will tell. I will update. This is my initial impressions just out of the box. Fit, though, is really good. No problems getting the knife in and out. It doesn't rattle, it's not loose, and has a decent amount of retention. So for me, the scabbard setup is a major win. Really, really like it. Let's talk about how the blade came to me, though. Well, since it was a bare blade wrapped in plastic and such, to protect it and everyone else, Cold Steel will often put, well, basically a sword tip cap on the end of their blades, and they did, but I think because of the way it got ridiculously bounced around in those containers, yeah, it was shattered and left in pieces, and I'm really impressed that the blade didn't come clean through the packaging. So, yeah, the packaging and the people involved are all intact. So that was a little scary. But the blade itself, again, not unexpected, came slathered in grease and wrapped in plastic. But I really feel like this knife has been sitting in storage in some, well, maybe unfriendly climates for a long, long period of time. Now, there's no blemishes on it, but the grease was congealed, polymerized to the point that it resembled, well, my best comparison, assuming one day this video might be monetized, I just don't want to say, but gross. Managed to get the blade wiped off, but the guard and especially the grip, I just couldn't get that crusted goo off of it. So I figured, okay, well, let's try a couple of different cleaners. I didn't like. I tried, CLP and some of the other things I normally use to clean a blade. So I figured, okay, alcohol sounds like an awesome idea. So I went to wipe it down with some alcohol, and I wound up removing layer after layer after layer of stain from the grip. It was almost an endless process. I feel like what they did was slathered the grip in stain, didn't wipe off the excess, didn't even maybe let it dry, maybe even put lacquer on over the wet stain, and then while it was still wet, slathered it in oil and then wrapped it in plastic and put it in a box for, well, who knows how long. Once I got it clean, though, I'm actually quite impressed with it. So let's talk about the specs, what I like about it, what I might not be so crazy about, and my intended applications. What's the future of this thing potentially going to be? All right, a super quick incomplete history of the Ames 1849 Rifleman's knife. This is apparently the first knife designed and ordered by the U.S. military during a time when they were, well, being pretty thoroughly humiliated by, let's call them, some of the greatest horse warriors in history. And I don't want to get into the dark side of how that went. But they were looking for, well, a new kind of unit, a new kind of tactics, and yeah, a new weapon set to go with it that would be effective under those circumstances. So they were arming their mounted riflemen, as they called them, with what they had at the time commonly was a single-shot percussion rifle, a 6-shot black powder revolver, and, well, they wanted something edged for close quarters use. It could also have some field application as a tool. And they were thinking, well, given the circumstances and the tactics, they probably wouldn't get a lot of use out of a bayonet, but maybe something bayonet-like. But they were also thinking that something like a full-size sword would be more cumbersome than was worthwhile for the average trooper. So they basically came up with something that's kind of a hybrid between a big knife and, you could argue, a short sword. And I think they did a very interesting job of it. 1,000 were made, and, well, the sort of end of the story is those units got devastated. They were stationed in Oregon and California. Those units got devastated by desertion. Because if you're familiar with that era in American history, 1849, a lot of them ran off to the gold rush and took their weapons with them. If you can find a surviving example in good shape today, at the auction sites, they tend to go for about $10,000 US. So yeah, my odds of laying my hands on a real one, pretty slim. I'd see one in a museum. So I can't compare a real one, which apparently Lynn Thompson has one in his collection, which is what inspired this, to this one. But knowing Lynn Thompson and knowing Cold Steel, I'm just going to assume this is a lot beefier than a real one. Also, this is made in India, and if you're familiar with Cold Steel swords made in India, yeah, they tend to be beefy and overbuilt, and distal taper, we don't need no stinking distal taper. So, okay, let's look at the specs. One interesting thing to get out of the way, though, is a steel, and this is another reason I chose this one over, say, the Scottish dirk. Cold Steel swords tend to be made most commonly out of 1055 carbon steel. That includes the Scottish dirk. Now, the 1055 has proven itself to be very satisfactory for a sword. It's resilient, it's tough, takes a good temper, and holds a functional edge, but not an edge, I would say, that has the retention enough to be the kind of edge I'd want on a knife. So it's not as hard as you would expect for a knife blade. This is made out of 1085. So yeah, much higher carbon, harder steel. I haven't tested the hardness on it, but as you saw from those initial test cuts, even with the secondary bevel on it, it did pretty good. I mean, it's not the most consistent edge. I can tune it up. The edge on the back edge, I mean, they made an attempt, but it's not terribly functional. But it has potential. 12-inch blade. It's about 1.5 inches wide and 1/4 inch thick. Weight, 24 ounces, 1.5 pounds. Which is about 0.7 kilograms. Yeah, I'm really trying to learn the whole metric thing. I probably got that wrong. Point of balance, 2.25 inches, 2.5 inches off the guard, which weight and balance makes it feel very, very sword-like. As a matter of fact, the size of this thing, the weight and the balance of this thing, make it feel a lot like some of my beefier kukri, or if you've had any experience with Wing Chun butterfly swords, yeah, very, very similar to this. So I can see it having a lot of potential as a weapon, well, by itself or in combination with something else like a sword. So I'll try to put it to those uses and let you know what I think of it. Also has a beefy enough solid brass guard, and I feel like I've got a reasonable amount of hand protection, not the full D guard that you'd get with, one of those butterfly swords, but something. So I'll let you know how I feel about it with some practice. Grip. Solid piece of wood. It's obviously not full tang. I don't see any steel coming through the sides here, so I don't know what the tang looks like. I haven't seen one broken apart. Has 3 smallish pins that are brass, and I guess the original ones were steel is what I've read. And then you've got a grommet for a, a lanyard. It's quite beefy. Again, very sword-like. Flat sides, rounded front to back, but it fits even my smallish hand pretty well, and there's no uncomfortable edges. Some reviewers have said fit and finish is not the most fantastic. So, yeah, maybe gap between the crossguard and the blade could be a little finer, but it's not terrible. Once I got all the goo off of it, it looks pretty good. A few little tiny shelves here where the wood and the brass don't perfectly line up, but those would be easy to fix if they bother me. But right now they don't. Feels pretty good, pretty solid in hand, moves pretty well. And I think, yeah, for my thought of using it as a companion weapon for a sizable blade, sword, broadsword, backsword, I think this thing's got enough mass and inertia to stop an incoming cut with no problem, and then has good mass for a strike, or yeah, great potential for a thrust. So I think it would make a great partner for something like a saber or a broadsword or a backsword, or, well, we'll see how it goes. Now, as I mentioned before, if you happen to have a Scottish dirk that you like, let me know about it in the comments. If you happen to have this knife, well, let's talk about that too. And other people have made some recommendations about, trying to put this to some fieldcraft, some bushcraft as a heavy chopper, or maybe an actual pig sticker for hunting. But it's kind of massive and heavy, I would think, for easy carry. So that would be a choice. But it might be something between a knife and a machete in certain ways. And like I said, even though the blade is very thick, it's not going to be a slicey knife, but it could be a choppy knife, depending on how it holds up. I haven't really taken it out and tested it hard yet. I will update you. There will be an update video to this knife down the road, one way or the other. If you're thinking about buying this knife, I spent $110 at Amazon for it. So I think for what I got, I definitely got my money's worth so far. If it breaks, I'll reconsider that. But I'm happy to try to answer any questions you might have, or about anything similar, any other recommendations you might have for me for something that I could use as a parrying dagger with a broadsword, backsword kind of a setup. Let me know what you've worked with, what's worked for you. But otherwise, until next time, as usual, thanks for watching, following, subscribing, sharing, being here for my journey, having our conversations in the comments, and I do hope to see you back for, well, whatever I get myself into next.